not much.
Yeah.
But I think where we're having those conversations with the CIP stuff is probably where it makes the most sense anyway. Just like, again, because separately, otherwise it's just operations, and CIP is really where you get the big kind of lumpy expenditures.
Right. So we
Okay,
start.
we're online.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
All right.
Mr. Chair.
Not my meeting.
Okay.
So I think what we should do just for the assistance of transcription is the first thing we do is a quick introduction, who you are. We'll pick up the voice and see the face. And
Okay. We're calling this meeting to order at 11:02. I'm Jay Sims.
My name is Bill Martin.
Fran Casal.
Doug Whittlesey.
Bob Moses.
Kevin Purcell.
Nicole Ford Burley.
City Manager Andrew Hosmer.
Deputy Finance Director Victoria Paquin.
All right, thank you. I think everybody has had a chance to review the agenda and also the budget reports that were put out. And then I tried to do a summary report. And let's see, I think we're expecting Matt Smith too. I know he was thinking about coming. But, so I don't know, if we want to jump right in. If there are specific questions on the Q2 budget, and I don't know if Victoria or Andrew want to jump in, are there any unforeseen surprises 6 months to date or concerns with the budget? When going through the different departments, I didn't see any major concerns. I do have some questions, like I know we've got a big expenditure for paving that we haven't really drawn on yet, and just wondering when that will be. But any concerns that you want to address before we jump in with specific questions?
We don't have any specific concerns about the budget. Obviously, we're monitoring fuel costs, which are trending kind of high, and a little bit with the airport budget, which was trending higher than we expected. But part of that is just due to timing of expenditures. Excuse me, when it comes to the paving budget, I would have to double check on the status of that, but I believe that they had an RFP out. It is not unusual for the city's paving budget to not be spent until closer to the end of the year, because paving goes out to bid, those bids come in, and then those funds are typically encumbered for construction in the following year, just because that's the nature of the business.
Okay, thanks, Victoria. Anybody want to jump in with questions? I do have some, but I can.
It's more a request for you, Jay, when you run the report, can you also add like after, because you got wages and salaries, health and dental, I know we've talked about categories a bit, but also like, can you add a percent, like a burn rate for each, because you know, kind of as that matrix. So I did it for my own on this one, but it's like helpful to see, because like, you know, obviously everyone's got very different dollar thresholds, but you know, I was going through like wages and salaries seem to be largely on track through the middle of the year, you know, benefits, et cetera. But like I was looking at like the percentages within, you know, within category by department.
Yes, no, yes, and the mayor had also suggested an allocation of the health insurance by FTEs, and we can discuss that a little bit later.
Yeah.
So,
And just, I'll say it. So I had asked in the initial report that, I'm on mute, sorry. So in the initial report that Jay had sent over for our first meeting, I had been looking through, and I was just looking at, obviously we've got the finance and benefits admin line is there and budgeted because it's just the most straightforward way to do it, which I'm totally fine with. But in terms of like, as he's running his model, being able to just allocate that out by FTE, probably by budget is the easiest, but that way we can get a sense of like the true cost of employment for each department, because it gets masked when we just dump 100% of that into the finance department. So like, I just say this as to distinguish, like if we do this, my request was just let's do this through the, you know, his automation versus having to split this out on a budget basis. Because we can do a reasonable allocation, and it's not perfect, but it'll be close enough.
all right. Then just jumping in, and when I started taking a look at the revenue, what was really eye-opening, but when we're looking at the property tax revenue and our budget, which is 27.7 million. And that was compared to the previous year budget at 27.7 million. It's, the actual budgeted property tax revenue is $37,000 lower than the previous year. When the taxpayers, when we look at the taxpayers, they say, well, how does that happen? Our property tax bills have increased substantially. And I think that just highlights the shift from commercial to the residential. But related to the property tax revenue, I also noticed we've collected 45.6% at this point, six months into the year, versus 47.7%. So we're $600,000, $601,000 behind in collections. And then when I go down to the interest and penalties on late payments, we're up about $27,000. So is there concern with collections at this point?
We're not aware of any concern with property tax revenue collection. It's not unusual to see that number vary from year to year just based on circumstance, and also considering that the first half, your first property tax bill is, you know, 1/2 of last year's rate times your valuation, so it doesn't always equal exactly 50% of what the tax revenue is gonna be for the year.
Yeah, and that's why, when I looked at that, I agree with that. But then when I looked at the interest and penalties being up 27%, that kind of concerned me a little bit. But if no concern on the city side, that's
My guess is
understood.
it's mostly timing.
Okay. Again, if anybody else has questions, I've got a whole list of them, so as Andrew knows,
They're always good.
I was gonna say, I'm sure most of my questions will overlap with yours, Jay, so.
okay. It is nice to see building permits up over the previous year by $277,000, and we're above budget we're 77% of budget. Are the impact fees included in building permits?
No, impact fees are run out of a separate restricted fund because we're required to track those individually, uniquely by the department that they're for, and also the timing when those impact fees were received.
Okay. And from looking at the schedule, the last time we updated our impact fees were in 2024. Do we plan on looking at the impact fees in this year's budget?
Impact fees are actually driven by the planning board, aren't they?
I believe so. So my knowledge on impact fees is not terribly deep. My understanding is that the last development of what the impact fee should be, the city hired a consultant who evaluated the projects that either had been done or were planned for the various departments, whether or not they would be impact fee eligible, and then determine the appropriate rate for impact fees. But yes, I do believe they're set by the planning board.
Okay.
So as far as plans to address them or revisit it, I don't have anything on my agenda to revisit them. I think, having come from a community where they were quite often waived, and there seemed to be a lack of standardization, which made it very difficult, and at times perhaps came across as arbitrary and unfair to others. What I have appreciated in Lebanon is that it's a standard that's adhered to pretty strictly. On the other side, Jay, they're pretty significant, those impact fees. And though we always find good uses for them, the city side, I understand it can at times perhaps have a chilling effect on some development that might be desired in the city. So I don't, those are the things that I kind of think of when I think about impact fees. One, they're pretty high. Two, what kind of impact does it have on development that we want to have in this city? Does it scare people away? On the other hand, you know, I'm just working on use of impact fees in various departments. I mean, we have some really significant needs in some of our buildings, for instance, that need to be addressed. And thankfully, we've got impact fee funds that have to be used by a certain time. So we've got some money to do that. So that's kind of some of the things that I balance as I start to think about impact fees and how they impact our budget.
You're right, it's being discussed by several towns and cities across New Hampshire, but we're in a growth mode, and our concern is, can we afford the cost of growth? And so currently, our impact fees for residential is $5.18 per thousand. Keens is a little bit different. Theirs is $8 per thousand, but then they have certain discounts if they've got a third-party review. So it might whittle down to the same, but what I found interesting is our impact fees for commercial ranges between $1.16 to $1.59 per thousand, depending on if it's, say, a nursing home or a restaurant or whatever. But substantially lower, Keens, again, is $10 per thousand. So it's interesting. And so planning has the power to waive the impact fees. Do they keep track, waive or assess, I guess assess and waive? Do they keep track of impact fees waived each year?
I can't say positively. I believe they do. They seem to track an awful lot, and I'd be surprised if they didn't track that, but I'm happy to follow up with you and confirm. Yeah.
What's interesting is some cities break it down into how they build up to their impact fee, so much for fire, police, education, which really gives the taxpayer an idea of, yeah, they're planning for growth. But then just to throw it out on the other side, Dover in 2024 actually got rid of their impact fees. But I think it depends on where each town or city is in their growth and what the status of their infrastructure is.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I mean, and in terms of our splits, a lot of it, obviously residential is driven very heavily by the school side of things. But like the commercial, as you're noting, some of that variance is really driven by the fire department, and how our impact fees get broken out. So like the highest rate is retail, restaurants, and lodging, and mostly it's police and fire. I mean, there's 9 cents for rec per thousand, like police and fire, the other $1.50, which makes sense, like kind of, when you think about it. Similarly, like nursing care, licensed care facilities, all is like $1.44 total. Of that, $1.19 is fire department, which again makes sense. So I think, like, at a high level, I can see where it wouldn't necessarily track, like, why is there this variation, but when you get into like the individual drivers and like the fee schedule and the basis, it makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, I mean, I think we've been on like a 3-ish year review schedule. If I look at all the previous basis assessment reports, seems to be every 3 years since 2016 or so. So kind of following that pattern, I'd expect to say like we review it next year for something in 28, kind of timing wise.
okay.
Oh, you're on a roll.
Yeah.
All right. This is for my, just being new on finance. When do you typically collect your meals and rooms tax, which is budgeted for about 1.5 million, right at the end of the year?
I believe the state usually disperses those sometime around November.
Yeah, Alicia.
Yes, it is near the end of the year.
Okay. All right.
And of course, we'll be heading into a budget year, 27, and that's always subject to the whims of the legislature as to how they'll apportion it this year and budget for it.
Okay.
Did we keep it flat from, like, I just can't remember, but we kept it flat year over year budget wise because of what the state was
To
doing.
the best of my recollection, it was flat. It had gone down considerably, and then it was, at some point during, I think, budget reconciliation, it was put back to flat year over year
Okay.
as a flat dollar amount.
Yeah, right, because they capped it. They just said what you got last year is what you're getting the next 2 years, and good
Yeah.
luck to you.
Yeah.
For, where we're writing grants for certain nonprofits like Families Flourish, have we collected on our CBDG grant reimbursement, our grant writing fees? In others, do we know that? First, I guess, have we been charging and are we collecting?
When we have grants that allow for administrative overhead, we do charge for that, and it is collected.
Okay, Families Flourish was one that we did write a grant, spent considerable time. I just wondering if we received that, so.
I would have to look into the specifics of that particular grant, but our active grants that we have right now, if they allow for administrative overhead, we are collecting that.
Okay. And again, it's not looking to nickel and dime, but where our staff are being used to write grants for nonprofits, it'd be nice to cover some overhead. This one, sorry for the shotgun approach here. Last year, the city prior to Andrew, the city manager engaged the Borslow Group to do a study of benefits. And at that point, there were no changes made to your benefit plans. Do you expect any changes in the next fiscal year, calendar year?
So you're asking, are we going to have any wage and compensation? Is there going to be a difference starting in 2027, January 1st?
It's more, was there anything from that study that you could use? I'm sure it was, did it do a peer group analysis of that, or?
Yeah, it did. I don't believe we are making any adjustment based on their recommendations. The adjustments to compensation in the budget that we're working on now reflect the contracts that are in place and the 4 contracts we anticipate coming online Q3, Q4 of this year. So there's not going to be any wild variation in one direction or the other of them, what we've anticipated. But
Okay, so you didn't see any areas where we were providing more benefits that we could cut back, or?
yeah, I'd have to get that. I'd have to get some of the details of that. But the best of my recollection is that, I'm not going to venture. I'm not going to give you my answer because I'm not 100% confident in what the conclusion of the Borslow Group was, and I don't want to mischaracterize it. I think that the idea of being very competitive, we have established that through their research. Are we wildly out of whack? I'm not under the impression that we are, but on this question, I think it's a good question. I'm happy to go into it a little deeper with you. Maybe on our next meeting, we'll get that report if you haven't had a chance to look at it and maybe discuss it and kind of dive into it deeper if you like as well.
Okay.
So sorry, I don't have a
Thank you.
darn good specific answer for you. I just don't right now.
Along this line, so Lebanon is unique in offering a dependent care subsidy, which pre-tax dependent care is not unusual. That's actually a common benefit. What the city of Lebanon does is provide up to $5,000 per employee of after-tax monies. So I did take a look. I couldn't find any other municipality in New Hampshire or Vermont that offers that. So then I did a countrywide search, and the 2 came up, Santa Clara, California, which didn't surprise me, and another California municipality. So what was interesting about Santa Clara, which makes a lot more sense, is they did it on household income. So we would give you $5,000 if your household income didn't exceed $60,000. So we could have a city employee with household income making joint household income of $300,000, getting a $5,000 stipend, which I don't think that's really the intent of this. So when I take a look, and this, maybe Victoria or Lisa can answer this, when I look at budget to actual, right now I don't see anything on the dependent care line. We budgeted about $190,000, $160 165,000 in the general fund, and then the enterprise fund's another 35,000. Is that, has that been taken advantage of this year by people that are eligible, or is it buried in one of the other benefit lines at this point?
So there are employees who take advantage of that program. We run the actual expense for dependent care out of a special revolving fund, because obviously we get one bill in for all the departments. And then we go in and make a transfer, from the responsible department into the special revolving fund to cover the expense. When you're looking at the Q2 reports, most of the submittals for reimbursement in the first quarter of the year are actually for prior year. So those end up going in as 25 expenses. And my guess would be that we just had not made the appropriate transfer for Q2 by the time that we pulled the financials, but I'll double check on that.
Okay.
You know, was it because we're not doing it on a constant basis? We're doing the transfers on a periodic basis and just running the expense reimbursement.
Correct. Yep. So we get those bills once a quarter. And actually the June bill probably came in July. So then we would have had to look at those expenses and allocate them appropriately.
I'm Jay, and I'm sorry, go right ahead.
I was just going to ask, is that benefit contractual with all of the union contracts, or is that a separate benefit?
It's, no, it is right on the union contracts. It's at the city manager's discretion annually.
That's correct. Yeah, that is correct. And one thing we're looking at as we work on the 27 budget is usage of this benefit. And of course, the overall expense and how we've budgeted for it. So it is a topic of our discussions as we work on the 27 budget, because it's, I can't tell you whether we're going to recommend that it remain the same for 27 or adjust it significantly, but I certainly see that as an opportunity to maybe tighten our belt just a hair there, just based on usage. Which is, it's significant dollars that we budget for and significant dollars that we expend. But overall, as a percentage of our workforce population, I'm not sure it's taken advantage of to the extent that perhaps it was anticipated. That's my takeaway, having not been here when it was instituted, but.
And some of it too is one, we did change how we budgeted a little bit for this year, last year, right? Kind of because I pushed for this, which is we are pushing to move more towards a refill method, or I can't remember the exact phrase because I'm only halfway through my coffee, but like it was a recharge function to say like, look, if we're gonna, spend, if we have a balance of X, we're spending Y, we need to budget for, whatever that is to recharge it. So to reduce that amount because it's being rolled through a special revolving fund. But going back a step further, part of why it was put in place this way too was because it was a recognition that FSA is right at the end of the year, that money disappears. And so it was a way to attract and retain basically people with families and young children to kind of maintain a workforce supply. Right, obviously, like Lebanon isn't unique in this, in that we have an aging workforce overall. And so it was a way to kind of try and address some of that, to incentivize essentially younger employees to come and stay. And the idea was that really, like, if we do this as an FSA, right, people have to guess how much they're going to use, and it becomes that whole like calculus that no one wants to do. Like, I don't like doing it, and so the idea is that, like, if the city just puts this money up, the city just gets its money back, and also then reduces like turnover, vacancy, and again starts bringing in younger employees to try and maintain that kind of range of ages that we weren't necessarily seeing. So I say that just to provide the context for why the previous city manager had put that in place the way he did. There were specific reasons behind it. I mean, whether or not that is held true, I don't know, but I would say we should include that as part of the analysis, to say, like, and I will say I've asked the city manager to look at this in terms of our budget overall too, is like, how do our vacancy rates compare to other areas in the state? Because obviously, like, we have an incentive to reduce both turnover and vacancy. So, and that would be, one of, and you know this, right? Like, one of 8,000 different, like, points of kind of comparison is the overall compensation. So I think that's, anyway, I just wanted to provide some of the history and context around that one.
Okay. Anybody else have questions on dependent care? This is a sensitive one that I brought up last year, so I kind of like to stay on it, even if there's a revision or as far as criteria, so.
Yeah, I would just say for that one, I would, if that gets looked at, it's a long-term kind of phase in, right? Because like you can't, certainly wouldn't do, if we're looking for next year, like you've got to, if you're going to make any real material changes, you'd want to be like phasing that out. Because again, it could be disruptive to the very people you're trying to keep here.
Right.
Right, because they're going to look at it as their total compensation,
Yeah.
right?
I agree for human resource, their presentation, it will be helpful, as the mayor had mentioned, to provide retention age of employees by department.
Yeah.
That would be helpful.
Yeah, because I know it's been a challenge in some of our departments where we have older employees and facing kind of down the barrel of a lot of potential retirements. I mean, I think the city isn't as bad a shape as other groups in this area, but I always think of DH, where like it's not hidden knowledge, but DH has always said for a long time, like they have a very aging workforce. And so it's like these are the kind of incentives I think that were being looked at to counterbalance that same issue that other groups are having. And it's, ties into the state's demographics overall, which is, at least for our area, right? Lebanon is actually kind of a outlier in this, but right, for the past 20 years at least, more, right, most of the younger age population has been shifting south, with the exception of Lebanon, for a variety of reasons. But like that's, again, I think just balance as we look at that, it's one of the key considerations from a policy perspective that like we would be worried about, not just for the city and its employment, but like overall, like how are our businesses going to manage, with an aging populace where like if everyone who could retire did, everyone would have to shut down.
Right. This one's for the city manager. We've got a three-phase project for our solar, and I know last year we looked at, the council and city manager looked at a potential buyout, wondering what the status of that is. I also noticed in some areas our electricity costs were up, and what percent of, I think I read online somewhere that, but if you can confirm, what percent of energy produced actually reduces our municipal electricity costs? I've read it's between 16 to 20%, but I'm not sure if that's accurate. But I do know we also had a grant, and we did put solar on top of the new fire station. And so I know there was a lot of construction, electricity, I'm sure, involved, but I think fire was up just a little bit. But I guess where are we with the three? I know phase 1 and 2 are complete. Where are we with phase 3, which was, I think, to introduce solar to approximately 30 of our city-owned properties?
If it's okay, Jay, next meeting? No.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
When it comes to the expenses on electricity, though, part of the reason expenses are up is because electricity is just more expensive. But also at one point, the city was using solar revenue to reduce the expense lines, and that's no longer the case in the fund. So you'll see that there's solar revenue in addition to the electric expense. So we've kind of separated the solar revenue from the cost of electricity.
Okay. Okay, so, all right, I see what you're saying. So in previous periods, you reduced the electricity cost with the solar revenue. Now you're recognizing the solar revenue generated.
Correct.
So in addition to the solar, we also have the landfill gas to energy project that's also supposed to reduce our energy costs for the city, as well as we're selling the renewable energy credits. I'm excited to see revenue generated through 6 months. And I'm excited that our expenses related to landfill gas to energy is below budget. I know that's going to be a topic, I think, next month, that we're going to get into it a little bit more, but as you know, that's been a concern of mine also. What is the break even of landfill gas to energy? And we can discuss that next month. But it appears we're going to be coming close to hitting budget on that this year, which I think we were budgeting about a $300,000 loss, if I recall. So do we want to just table that until next?
It's complicated. The city took on debt to finance that project, so when we talk about landfill gas to energy and whether or not it's paying for itself, we always consider that. I can say that at this point, it appears that the revenue that's being generated from the plant does cover its operational expenses and some of the debt service. So at this point, our assessment would be that the city's best move is to continue to operate the plant. That said, it is still very early in the plant's life. It only really came online fully towards the end of last year. So a lot of what we're looking at is projections and estimates based on what we have currently available for data.
Okay.
Just a quick follow-up. So I'm a little bit familiar with RECs. Are they all staying within the enterprise fund? Or at some point, do the RECs get distributed outside of the enterprise fund? I'm just curious how the
so-
RECs are gonna work.
With landfill gas to energy, they do specifically stay within the solid waste fund.
And then this all plays into, unfortunately, public comment was due to the state yesterday on the landfill and whether or not Lebanon should continue. I'm not sure if I'm for or against expanding the landfill. My only question is, I think the council needs to do more research along with the state. Over 255 landfills have been closed in the state of New Hampshire. There are 3 left, Lebanon, Nashua, North Conway. So if everybody's getting out, I know there might be an added cost. We would have to set up a transfer station, but I think that's what the council needs to review, and maybe finance needs to jump in on that, just to say, should we be in the landfill business? And then what is the impact on the landfill gas to energy project? But again, I think that's a discussion for another day, but comments were due to the state yesterday of any concerns regarding the expansion of the landfill. I think we currently have 3 to 4 years left on the current landfill, and whether or not that projection included our rapid growth that we're seeing with over 2,000 housing units in process in some, so whether we're still on target for that 3 to 4 year timeline.
As you are well aware, another complicated question, certainly very fair, but very complicated to the extent that it has gone into the calculation, the window of usability for phase 2. Maybe you all know, phase 1 is capped, it's unlined, it's been capped. Phase 2 is what we're closing out right now and have perhaps the end of 28 or mid 29 is when that should be filled as well, and all airspace used, and then we've begun the capping portion of that as well. Phase 3 is the landfill portion that may have a life expectancy of somewhere around 19 years based on current estimates. There is a phase 4, which is beyond our lifetime and probably something I would recommend the city is not really have the appetite for. No one wants a landfill. Unfortunately, what hamstrung the city or is hamstringing the city right now is that there was an extended period of time when the fees associated with using the landfill stagnated. Yeah. So we didn't have the ability to anticipate future costs, prepare for capping, all sorts of things. So at this point, we want to look at if phase 3 is approved, what is the best use of phase 3? And I've heard from people throughout the city that it should be limited as to who has access to it, to extend the lifespan of it. We also have to consider too that some of the communities, particularly outside of the state of New Hampshire, who use the landfill, allow us a bit of margin to cover our costs and prepare for the future as well. So I can understand why Lebanon residents say, well, we shouldn't allow people from Vermont or communities from Vermont to use it. On the other hand, we do have some margin there that helps us make up for those years when the fees were stagnant and should have been increasing and they didn't. So we're trying to make sure that we get enough revenue to take care of our current operating costs, but also make sure that we are completely prepared for the future, which is not only protecting the environment and the land there, but also making sure it's pretty darn close to the river, the Connecticut River, and, which feeds aquifers that we use for our drinking water as well. So we're in a delicate balance here. And still, I guess in this instance, there are a number of questions, far more questions than answers right now, but you're raising good points.
And a couple things. This is where we have I don't know what we're calling it. Let's call it the landfill task force that's headed up by Tim McNamara. And I don't know, there's other people involved, but Tim's leading it, so I'm happy to leave it to him. So a lot of those are the questions that like Tim has certainly been raising and wants to answer. In terms of phase 3, phase 4, I think the last time council discussed, we were all, I would say, generally in agreement that regardless of our feelings on cost in the matter overall, like phase 3 is kind of a necessity. How we treat it, obviously, I think is still an open question, but also to recap, I don't think there's any of us that was really kind of outspoken in favor of pursuing phase 4, because that one in particular, it looks at reopening the phase 1 and lining it, and like there's just such, even DPW had said, like there's such a margin for problems there for something that at the current time all of our data suggests is actually really well maintained. We aren't seeing leakages. We're not seeing these problems. And so like reopening it could be very problematic. At this time, I would say there isn't a plan to pursue phase 4, either from a practical, like administrative perspective or a policy perspective. Phase 3, we're kind of like, well, we've got a couple of years left, so we really need to pursue this to give ourselves that buffer room to figure these questions out. And then the one thing I would note is we get a little over $500,000 right now from the landfill enterprise fund in the general fund as a community host fee. So that's the other piece too, is if we were to give all of the 30-something communities or however many communities it is notice that like, hey, a year from now, we are not going to collect your materials, we would lose that $500,000. So that would be like direct tax burden on, taxpayers within like both businesses and residents. And likely even with a transfer station, everyone would see their actual disposal fees probably go up, because it's like that would basically put the state of New Hampshire down to really the only kind of for-profit, for lack of a better term, landfill would be the Casella landfill. That even now, like the state legislature is continuing to restrict even, like there's that, and that ties into my other point of like, as you noted, like there's been a lot of landfill closures. They just all reached their lifespan, and the permitting process especially has gotten, from my perspective, I could be wrong about this, but like from my perspective, has gotten so cumbersome and burdensome, and it's so hard to manage effectively that people are just like, we're just done. We don't need to do this, and we'll send it off again to that Casella-owned state landfill or out of state. So it's just like, and then the costs just get masked, right? So you don't have to deal with it. But I just wanted to add those notes, because we've talked about this a bit, but like to your point, like it is worth that conversation. And I think that it gets really specialized. So that's why we have that task force to start really like digging in on that. I think it's like Tim and Andrew Fonts, I think, and there's at least one, I think Lori's involved in that too. Don't quote me on that.
Yeah, okay.
Jay,
Kevin.
is there an effort to run parallel analysis on not even moving ahead with phase 3 and just converting to a transfer station? Like real hard numbers, like this is the cost, this is that cost? And do we save more than $500,000 in not having the landfill, or can we move those costs, onto whoever, if we convert to the transfer station. It just seems like this is I haven't heard anything where, well, whatever.
Yeah,
I guess that's the,
we'd have to follow up with DPW. My recollection is that was being looked at, but I wasn't sure. I can't remember the timeline. Because I know I think Tim had asked about that too. And it was in that same conversation and it was a long night. So I'm just not, we can follow up with DPW.
I was just curious, like if there's a consultant, like here, in 60 days, give us these numbers.
I think Sanford Head is pulling those numbers together as I understand it, but in terms of if that's true and timeline, we'd have to follow up with Chris, I think. But we can ask Chris.
Yeah, I'm just curious, yeah.
Because what I'd like to see with the task force, and maybe they've got this on their plan already, is when the landfill closes in 19 years, the city of Lebanon is on the hook for monitoring and testing for the next at least 40 years, or maybe even forever. So I want to make sure we've got reserves being built, which might mean increasing tipping fees and host fees once again. And really, those other towns are similar to us. Our options are limited of where they're going to send their garbage. So to me, that's the key. If we're going to be in the landfill business, we know there's an end of life to it. Make sure we've got the reserves to fund when all these towns, when we're all doing transfer stations.
Yeah, there are reserves being taken, but that's like, it's all based off actuarial assumptions. So that I would say take that one, feel free to take that one offline, but from throwing you back in the audit arena. But that would be again, it gets down to, really do the actuarial assumptions being built in for post-closure costs seem reasonable? And I think right now the post-closure fund is at $8 million.
Sanborn Head estimates the cost of closure and also post-closure monitoring on an annual basis, and we do have reserves that are set aside to take care of those costs.
Yeah, so I think it gets into just
12 million.
12 million, yeah.
I think we're at 12 million.
Okay, so we're at 12 million, because I think that their estimated net present value was something or their estimated cost was something like 16-ish or so, and then there's obviously you've got your rate of return on some of this and things like that. And that would be too where something to consider, for you specifically and kind of your joint role as trustees of the trust too, is are the actuarial assumptions of rate of return consistent with how some of these funds are being invested, right? Because that's the biggest issue with pension liabilities is we're going to get 8% a year. Well, we've been getting 4, and then all of a sudden you have this big deficit in terms of the actual balance versus your liability. But that would be, in terms of that piece, we are pulling for it. And I'd say we're going to continue to increase, review and increase our various fees around that. And that's 3 years ago is before anyone here was on council except for me, I guess. We actually looked at that historical trend to Andrew's point of the stagnation. It just didn't move. We've actually kind of aggressively increased the fees just to account to kind of fix the overall trajectory. But if I'm remembering correctly, we still have another couple of years of likely solid fee increases to kind of get to where it should have been all along.
Yeah, okay.
We've heard from Casella that when they deliver our new fee schedule to their communities, there's a little shock, but it's our land. There are only so many options available, not to exploit the opportunity, but it's sort of to correct for decades of better management that should have taken place. How about that? So, but we do have a significant reserve fund associated with this. We are in the midst of working with the state to make sure that we have access to it, as the ongoing costs associated with capping phase 3 and monitoring are pretty significant.
Okay.
Jay, I don't know if this has been ever looked into or not, but these are enterprise funds, the landfill and the airport. So if we could increase margins, I love increasing margins a little bit to reduce the burden on taxpayers. If we had an asset such as the landfill or the airport, have we ever considered, if we saw a way to show a profit in the airport, converting that from an enterprise fund to a for-profit?
It's a government. I don't know how you create a public entity into a private entity.
Well, not a private, it
But
would
if you're
be
profitable.
city-owned, it would be city-owned, but the classification would not be an enterprise fund, it would be an income
No,
fund.
so under governmental accounting standards, we are prohibited from operating any sort of utility or enterprise in a for-profit nature and taking monies from those funds to support the general fund. That said, we are allowed to account for things like administrative overhead. So all of your enterprise funds, water, sewer, the airport, and solid waste all contribute into the general fund dollars to offset the costs of the city manager, the finance department, our cyber services team, the DPW admin. So you do have those revenues that are coming from the enterprise funds into the general fund, thereby reducing your tax rate to pay for the services that those enterprises are receiving from the city as a whole. But that is about the extent of the funding that you can take from those enterprises.
That's federal accounting, correct, or is that state?
Governmental accounting standards, yep.
Also, Matt, I know Matt was looking for our next meeting. Can we get the format both in PDF and Excel? I think Matt was looking to open it in Excel also.
Yes, please.
We're looking for PDF and Excel of the budget reports?
Yes.
Yeah. Counselor Ford Burley, I've been hogging the questions here. Do you have any specific?
I do, actually,
Okay,
thanks.
all right.
Just two quick ones. Under planning and zoning consultants, we're at 0 spent year to date. And if I remember correctly, there were, this was to maybe bring on a consultant to help with building inspections or something like that. So I just wanted to see if we are anticipating seeing any expenses on that line this year, or if that's, if things have changed.
So we have brought on another building inspector. So that it wouldn't show up there. It's not an outside service that we're using right now. It is a new FTE that was approved. I do believe some of those consultants were in anticipation perhaps of beginning to work on things like the master plan. Let me get for you what planning anticipates using from that fund by the end of the year and see if we can't get you some insight into that.
Thank you. And then my other question is about human services direct assistance. We're only at 20% year to date. And so I was just curious about is that a timing issue or is it really, are we that far under the anticipated expenditures?
Some of it is timing. Some of it is also because there are some expenses, particularly when it comes to sheltering individuals, where the city expends those funds and then we receive funding from the county or from the towns who are responsible for those individuals, which then offsets that expense. So you'll recall last year we asked council for approval to transfer unspent expenses into the public assistance revolving fund. So it's not, I would say it's not unusual for those categories to show a lower expenditure, particularly at this time of year, because we might have had those initial expenses towards winter, we might have received some reimbursements, and then as we head back into colder weather, we might see those expenses come back up again.
Thank you.
I just had a couple of questions on the financial outlook schedule that was included.
Sure.
Just a couple of questions, comments. So this unissued debts for both enterprise funds and the general fund, some of the projects go back to 2018, 2020. When do they get closed out? Do they get closed out? Do they get rolled into, different projects? How's that all dealt with?
So some projects are developed through the capital improvement process
understand.
and requested by council. Some of those projects have very long timelines. Depending on where they were in the process when they initially came for approval, by the time that you get through design and permitting and then construction, it can be a number of years before you actually see any significant expenses on that project. The other component to that is we try not to borrow in advance. So when you're talking about a big project where you have these expenditures, we borrow once a year and we try to look at, okay, what have we actually spent? What do we need to borrow right now? Or what can maybe wait until next year? So particularly this year, we didn't have any projects that were in a place where we felt like we had to borrow right now. So we were planning to borrow next year instead, which kind of gives the city that little bit of reprieve from incurring new debt and paying the interest and all of that.
So it's-
If the project never happens, what you'll end up seeing is that we'll come back to council and we'll say, hey, this project is finished and it didn't cost as much as we expected. So we want you to rescind that bonding authority and authorization. And typically that happens in the fall.
Okay, I mean, there's just a couple in there that go back to 2018. That just seems like a long time.
It
and-
does seem like a long time, but unfortunately in the municipal world with different kinds of construction, as everyone has seen with the dry bridge, it can be a very long time between when a project is conceived and when it can actually happen.
I mean, even the Kimball Street infrastructure where I live, that's 2022 and it's been done
That project,
for a year.
that project is actually just wrapping up with final approval of the grant process. They're just submitting their final paperwork, and then that will most likely be on the list of things that we're able to say this is now finished.
So, and then just a general comment on the enterprise and general fund debt payments and balances. It would be helpful or informative, I think. I mean, you'll see this in your audited financial statements, but for people looking at it, where you have your total outstanding principal for 25, 26, 27, 28, it would be nice to show sort of a 5-year schedule of what the principal payments are, and then thereafter, so it reconciles. So you can sort of see what your schedule of principal payments, like when does some of this debt fall off? What is the schedule? So it would be nice to see that on the bottom, where it says total outstanding principal 2025, I wouldn't bother with 2025, but 2026, 27, 28. What's the 5-year schedule of principal payments that ties out to that?
Sure.
And then I think it just sort of, and I think maybe you just addressed it, I was just curious, we're anticipating 7.4 million of principal added to the 2027 debt service. I just think, would like to know a little bit more what that's all, what that is and how that's come about.
So that number is just what we anticipate borrowing in 2027. I believe we had a slide on what projects are included in that anticipated borrowing. It's been a minute since I looked at the financial outlook presentation.
I mean, that's what I focused more on, was just the general, didn't get into the weeds.
So what makes up that 7.4? It was part of our notes for the presentation, but you would be adding several of the projects that are on the authorized unissued debt together. So it's based on when we think those projects will be wrapping up, and so it would be an appropriate time to bond them.
So it's not necessarily new, the 7.4 million is not necessarily new projects.
Correct. That would be the previously authorized.
This is, anticipated
Right.
unissued debt.
Exactly.
That will come forward in 2027.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, it's just some of this stuff just has such a long tail, like the Truesbrook Bridge. Like, I mean, that whole project got started before I was even on council. And
No,
I
I
think
understand.
yeah.
But it would be helpful to see the, in terms of planning going forward, what your debts, what your anticipated debt service, principal payments are sort of on a 5-year schedule. Just see that succinctly in one spot.
And maybe we can just wrap that into the, we have the budget presentations that we've kept online for 2026 of just having that, because we have debt service as a separate section, just have that schedule. And I think because we've had that in the overall presentation before, but having it specifically broken out along with the other kind of pieces is really helpful.
All right. other questions. We do have a couple other agenda items. Matt, I don't know if you have any questions.
Yes, and please, I apologize for being late. So if we covered any of these already, feel free to tell me to refer to the recording. I had a question on the legal spending. It's at 19% of budget so far through Q2. Is this an area where we might see some savings, or is there more of a timing issue here?
Thanks, Matt. Always difficult to predict. The city found itself in some very expensive litigation over the past few years. And those legal bills were pretty darn expensive. We budgeted accordingly this year, hoping that we would spend a lot less. I have decided to take a lot of legal work in-house to an in-house attorney that works in planning to save on some of those expenses. What I have found, though, is that we just have a lot of legal work that, as I put more on his plate, he's not fulfilling all of his responsibilities in the planning department as well. So it might be overloading one person with not only planning department responsibilities, which is his primary core responsibility, we'll say, with additional legal responsibilities. We will be able to save some money. There is a significant outstanding bill associated with XYZ Dairy, which came about prior to my arrival here, that would potentially eat up the entire balance of what we've got left this year. I haven't addressed it quite yet because I'm not satisfied. It was a law firm. It was our law firm, Drummond Woodsum. We received a 91A. They couldn't complete it, so they engaged another firm to do this 91A work, which was extensive, tedious, incredibly expensive. When the bill finally came back, I don't think anyone anticipated the bill to be that high. So I'm reluctant to pay it as it stands until they make significant concessions on the bill. Even then, I'll pay it and I'll be irritated because I just think it's a gaffe. I can say that in public.
Aren't we allowed to charge back for 91A costs, records requests? Like,
Knowing the party involved would be prolonged and
It would.
even more expensive. So it's just a matter of, do we pay that now and bite the bullet, so to speak, or do we continue in this? So I guess
No,
your
I know,
point
I
is,
just mean in
we've had some real challenges in the city starting many years ago, trying to put as many of them to bed as possible and save on that on that line. And I'm also trying to bring a lot of that expense in-house with really a competent person here. I'm just trying to figure out how to balance all of his responsibilities to continue to make it worthwhile. We also know that all of the firms throughout New Hampshire, maybe like to some extent, some of the CPA firms, they're overloaded with work and the turnaround time is too long. And there are things that we need in a more timely fashion too. So we're thinking about some options for 2027.
so not to say we shouldn't just pay the bill when we need to pay the bill, but I would perhaps provide an invoice to the requester, as is our right under 91A, as I understand it. Because I would love to attach a lien. I'm just saying, we have the right under a 91A request to pass along.
We've passed along a small amount of it and sent that party an invoice. That conversation lasted fewer than 9 minutes in my office.
Oh, no, I understand all that.
I've tried to deal with this diplomatically and not automatically call up the lawyer and say, go to work.
Yeah, given the huge legal bill that has been generated.
It's awful, so.
Can I ask, what's the bill? How much is the bill?
It's in the hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay.
And that's the current bill, by the way. That's not the total cost of.
Of that litigation.
Yeah.
It seems like, yeah, dealing with that diplomatically, and,
just pretending it's not there and it'll go away.
We have for years tried to deal with
I
this
mean, I would go back to
diplomatically.
the law firm and just say, we're not paying all this. And
I've said that, we've said that, and, yeah,
But I wouldn't encourage fighting more, is that what you're talking?
I'm not encouraging fight anymore.
I would not fight anymore.
Yeah, part of me is being new to this position. I'd like to start with as much of a clean slate as possible here on certain matters.
Yeah.
But I don't want to sell the city short in what it's owed, or.
Totally.
Or tell my departments that, oh, I want to start fresh, start over, and. But I wish it were clean slate complete across the board. So we could better budget, find out where the savings exist, and apply them to the proposed budget. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this year's budget was a direct result of basically being massively under budgeted in '25. So like we had to do essentially supplemental appropriations to move funds within the overall budget to the legal line. Because the bills just came in way higher than expected because of this one particular, let's say, set of litigation.
Similar question on going the other way on Public Works and the winter operations, where we're at 92% already expended. With the December expenses still ahead of us, do those end up landing in January, or are we just had that expensive of a winter?
No, so the way that the accounting works is we spend most of January and some of February making sure that all of the expenses that happened in the prior year are actually billed to the prior year. That said, I would need to look, but from my experience with municipalities, it is not unusual to see something like winter maintenance be most of the way spent by the time that you get through January, February, March, and April.
Yeah.
Because that tends to be the heaviest winter precipitation months. Not that I should be saying this out loud, but we tend to make it through the rest of the year just fine without being significantly over budget.
If I can just add one thing for you there, in the winter maintenance division, if you're looking specifically at either the supply line or, I think it's under general supplies, they have an open purchase order for some of the salt product. So that's gonna show as expense because it's encumbered, but they do that based on a specific price that we're able to engage in.
Thank you. And the airport being over at this point and some maintenance being deferred to 2027, what is the impact to the airport's operation from deferring that maintenance? Are we setting ourselves up for more trouble by putting that off?
The airport manager felt comfortable with deferring the maintenance until the following fiscal year. They were relatively small dollar projects that were able to be comfortably deferred without a detrimental impact to operations.
Okay.
Yeah, because a lot of the work at the airport right now is FAA funded, so it's like those various projects that we've got where it's like 95 to 100% federally funded, so that's gonna drive a lot of, like, with the paving, like the air.
The new tower.
Yeah, the new tower, the tarmac widening, I don't know what, the runway widening project, there's a couple others, and again, there's a lot of FAA dollars involved there. So we're still moving forward with those. It's more of the small, like, as Rebecca's saying, the smaller dollar kind of maintenance items.
All right.
All set?
Care to move on to the next agenda item?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else on Fran or Bill, any questions on?
I don't have a question, but just a reaction. So the first time that I've seen these numbers was yesterday. And I was really impressed. I was expecting to see some deviation in other budgets I've seen other organizations over the years. I was very impressed by the fact that certainly on a granular level there might be some distance between, say, 50% and whatever the true number to date has been. But big bucket wise, It seems like things are tracking well, and I think it sort of makes me want to just say good job and thank you to those of you who have sort of managed the process for the first 6 months of the year. So
That's kind of you to say, thanks. And I think this, as I've gotten to know the staff here, I've equally been impressed. There are plenty of opportunities to get better and improve, there always are. But the staff here is very competent, very professional, and very committed to the idea of public service to the people of the city. So that's nice to hear from someone from the outside. I'll make sure to share that with folks as well.
please, yeah.
I must step out for an engagement right now. I'm sorry to leave early. If you have specific questions for me that I wasn't able to address, I've got the notes of things I need to follow up on with you, Jay, and we'll try and get those done. But if there's something that you need me for, please send me an email. I'm happy to respond.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Real quick for Rebecca, one question. So, or this may be a follow-up with Perry, but like our hardware spend is only 7.5%. Are we just backloading this in sense of like we're gonna replace the hardware kind of in the back half of the year, do you know?
I would have to look. My guess is that Perry tends to also end up with his purchase orders closer to the end of the year.
All right. Yeah, can you just follow up with him and just get a sense of like when this is gonna hit? Cause I know like hardware is so asynchronous in terms of like when it gets done. I know the police and fire are really specific, not just computers, so.
Yes.
I was just curious.
Okay, well, I guess these were future agenda items, discussion of FTE analysis, and maybe Victoria and Alicia can weigh in on this. I've sent a sample of a couple different municipalities as far as supporting exhibits for the budget, and where wages and benefits represent our largest operating line items. We're looking for a little bit more detail on the FTE analysis. Alicia, did you have any questions or concerns on what I had sent for samples?
I don't think we have any questions. I think that we had placed it on the agenda as a topic that we needed to discuss, because we received a few samples from you. And then we received a separate request from the mayor. And I wasn't sure kind of.
Which one was mine?
I think probably your
You
summary
had
one that you.
sent, Mayor, you had sent a separate email, I believe, just to the city manager. That was kind of like a cover sheet to
Oh,
a
okay.
suggestion for the budget presentation.
Gotcha.
And so we were kind of leaving it as an open topic so that we could kind of discuss as a group to see which option would work the best for all parties, and if it was something that it needed to be presented in the format that the mayor's requesting, or if it could be a combination of kind of that thought process with the samples that Jay sent, and what would make
Yeah.
the most sense for the kind of the entire audience.
Yeah, sorry, let me see if because last week when I had some time, I pulled together just like a draft, kind of like, hey, if we're gonna do, and I sent it to Andrew just as like, hey, like, what are your initial thoughts? But just pulling that up, it was basically like what I wanted to see. I don't think it's necessarily exclusive from what you sent out, Jay, but it was basically like, what's your full-time, part-time, and total FTEs for FY26 actual, FY26 budget, and FY27 budget, and then like a narrative justification associated for like where there's an increase or a change, to kind of address some of the items that we've run into in the past few years where, there was FTE being added from a budget perspective, and we're like, well, I remember this from like 2-3 years ago. Okay, where is this, like, why do we have this new FTE? And we found out, well, I've already filled that FTE. Like, I've already hired that person. It's like, okay, so our choices are cover this or terminate the person. Cool. And in a way to kind of address some of that. Mine was just a tabular format versus like what some of the stuff that you had. So we can, it was just meant more as, I'll send it to you just so you can see what I was doing, but it was just like a starting point for like what I think we should start including for FY27 budget presentations that are gonna start happening in October to get to some of that summary level information. But again, it was like even some of it, some of the summaries, it's what you and I have talked about in terms of expense side, but some of it was like trying to think about like those things that I know I will ask, that I know Counselor Ford Burley asks, and that some of us, like when you've asked questions in the audience, like call out these things so we don't have to ask the question. But it, again, I'd sent it as a draft being like, can this be accommodated? So, but yeah, we can talk about that one, Alicia. I didn't necessarily mean them to be exclusive, because they're probably gonna be both.
So this,
I think that that's probably what we were trying to narrow in on, just because of the fact that we're, halfway through August, and compiling the data from those two different perspectives would likely be time consuming. I'm not saying that it's impossible, but because you're gathering the information and presenting it in two different manners, I'm not sure exactly what that would look like.
yeah, and that's where I think, Alicia, HR could, we hate to put everything on finance with you and Victoria, so HR I would think would have access to that too, so. But
Yeah, and I would say really like most of this, I mean, just looking at what Jay had, Jay's is much more granular, but you'd need the granular to get to the summary that I was looking at. And it's the difference between like data tables versus a summary level explanation. So if we're approaching it in the way, like looking at Jay's FTE example one that he had sent you, if we were looking to prepare something like that, I mean, I'm fine with like kind of maybe cutting out part-time if that's easier, but like if you prepare it the way Jay's looking at, that will give you all the information you need for what I'm asking for the budget presentations. And if you want to send it to me in an Excel file, I can also just like throw it all together for what I need, so you don't have to do it.
I think we were kind of sort of leaning towards one of the examples that Jay sent, because I think that it's likely represents it a little bit better and is probably more digestible to the general public. And V can weigh in on this as well. I think we got into the weeds a little bit with the question that you had asked, simply because the full-time equivalent, if that's what we are referring to and labeling it as, we'd have to do a little bit of a deeper dive into overtime hours and find out exactly what the FTE number is.
So
Whereas if we're looking strictly at an employee count of, there's 5 full-time people and 1 part-time person in the city clerk's office. I mean, that's not accurate, but if we're looking at it from that standpoint, it's a little bit easier for us to connect the pieces.
Yeah, so that's why I was splitting out full-time versus part-time. Like a full-time FTE, if you work 60 hours, I get we're gonna pay overtime, but I would still count that as like a 1.0 FTE and then factors into the overtime costs. It's really the part-time where I agree with you, it can become a problem, but it's just like, again, we had this issue last year in the budget where we had a number of changes from part-time employees to full-time. And that really confused some of the requests. And similarly, where you had full-time people being full-time people added and part-time positions reduced, et cetera. Like, that's where I'm trying to get to, like, we can talk about methodology separately though, but, when I looked at what Jay had sent, those personnel counts are FTE equivalents.
all right, so we're at 12:15. Just want to make sure, was everybody able to gain access to SharePoint? Because we will probably start sharing documents through that, so in the future. I don't know, Bob, have you been on, or probably not yet?
I had my son-in-law help me, but yes.
Okay,
I had like 5 Microsoft accounts, but
yes.
the one.
Yeah.
All right. And then think we all understand the budget process. I went back to the financial outlook, and the timeline was there. So any additions to future agenda items? I think budget format might be, we might want to add that to next meeting, Victoria.
Yeah, in like summary format, because like we've got like the line item is great for some of us, but like, and we all know like I'm gonna nitpick through every little detail, but like I think it's just like the overall like summary presentation of some of this, because right there, like we need it to be more concise, but in doing so, I think we lost a couple tables that like I know you reached out to me about, a couple other people had reached out to me about, and so it's like we kind of want to find the best of like what the previous city manager would put in, but that was too much detail for a summary, and start saying like, what do we want to present as the summary and what makes the most sense? Like what's going to provide the most information, and then like, you know, kind of like bottom line up front, and then underneath it, like then say like, okay, now how do we get there? Like, or how did we get there? Right. And I think like how we do that is something that certainly like I've struggled with over the years. And so like, just, you know, collectively hitting our heads against that wall for next year's presentation, most likely.
Right. Yeah, what I'll drop in to SharePoint, which Alicia's probably getting sick of hearing this, but I like Portsmouth's budget, what they do by department. It allows the department heads to sell or pat themselves on the back. This is what we've accomplished. Here are our goals for next year. And here's our major line items, wages and benefits, repairs and maintenance, IT, et cetera. Breaking more of a summary for the general reader. So budget format, I think, for next month. Any other questions? Other business?
Do we have a meeting scheduled?
Next meeting.
Next meeting. What's the pleasure of people? How often do you want to meet? I know we're going to have to heat it up a little bit when we actually get the budget, but once a month until then,
A
or?
month from now.
Okay,
I would say my recommendation would be like just keep it as once a month, and then plan on like an extra meeting. I'm gonna say October, November-ish, or something, you know, like in terms of, because we'll have all the budget workshops done, I believe by about mid-November, third week of November, give or take.
Just before Thanksgiving.
Okay. So then like if we have we'd need to likely have some kind of additional meeting after that, once we've had all the budget presentations, to then kind of make any recommendations for council consideration, because right, like our schedule is going to be that first meeting in December is really the first public comment, and it's not really a whole lot of necessarily budget discussion per se. That's that second meeting when we have the full discussion and vote. But ideally, I would like, I'm just thinking in terms of my experience, like I think having something included in that first public feedback form so the public can see what the finance committee has recommended and weigh in would probably be best. So again, that's like the week, we might have to have like a really close turnaround, just given timing. We'll have to think about that one, but that we can figure that one out a little closer.
right. So you think maybe next month, say the 17th would be Thursday, the 17th at 11 o'clock. I know we have to check the room, this room here, but does this work for everybody, 11 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, I mean, it works for my schedule.
The room is available.
Woo! All right. Slot us in, Alicia, thank you. Okay,
17th at 11.
yep.
Is 1 hour the appropriate length, or should we schedule for a little longer?
This was I know people have day jobs, and so I think this was a little bit longer. I think when we have quarterly reports, maybe we schedule a little bit longer next month, where we're looking at budget format. we've FTE discussion and a paving, looking at paving management. I think that one's an important one because our infrastructure, I'm concerned about our infrastructure, I think as Bob can attest to over on Kimball and Green Street, and looking at some of the sidewalk conditions around too, so.
Take some of that extra Kimball Street money and move it around.
I'm wondering, Mayor, because that is a critical concern, whether we could invite Jay to that meeting just to give us an update on the.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think if Jake, well, I'll talk to Andrew about that. Yeah, I think that's fine. But yeah, I think because Jay has a really good, at this point, pre-canned report on that. But yeah, we can update it because like, I think that his presentation, because he gives us kind of a similar presentation every time around this, but like it gets into like our roadway conditions, the paving index, like cost to maintain, things like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think that makes sense. And I think if I'm remembering, it's like a 20-ish minute presentation, but we can just have like one meeting dedicated specifically to that. Cause then everyone can get up to speed on that, cause it's something like, I mean, we bumped the paving budget up tremendously and that still won't even get to maintenance conditions right now.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, half a mile a year and 99 miles of road is not good, so. Okay,
And then,
back to the time, hour and 15 minutes, and maybe, we're at an hour and 15. Let's do an hour for next month, and then, based upon the agenda items, we can adjust.
yeah, cause October or whenever we're gonna look at Q3, we'll probably wanna just have that as the only agenda item. And that would probably be like an hour and a half based off today, and even then we'll probably be capping out.
Okay. Good. I think the meeting's adjourned.
Good.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia, thanks, Victoria.
Jay,
Yes.